All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Out of the Woods Growing Income from Your Forest. Thank you for joining us. This evening, we have the Appalachian Forest National Heritage Area, also known as AFNHA. And we're going to do things a little differently. Normally, we introduce the speakers that we have, but part of our programming this evening is for everyone to learn a little bit about AFNHA and who they are and what they do. So we're going to let AFNHA talk about who they are, what they do, and introduce themselves. And then once AFNHA is done with their part of the programming, Joey Alloy is going to join us for some community gardening information. So I'm going to turn things over to Ben, and Ben is going to take over.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for having us. My name is Ben Duvall Irwin. I'm the communications manager with AFNHA, which, as she said, stands for Appalachian Forest National Heritage Area. And I'm going to start off tonight by telling you a little bit about our organization and what we do and some of the programs that we've got going on and how we support organizations and different partners in our region. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about what is a national heritage area. Your average person, lots of folks that we talk to, they have no idea what a national heritage area is. Now, a national heritage area is a place or a landscape with cultural, natural, or historic resources that are considered nationally important. And it's considered nationally important through federal legislation. And there are 62 national heritage areas across the country in several states, in even a couple of our territories. And there's 3 national heritage areas in West Virginia, including us, Wheeling National Heritage Area, and the Cole National Heritage Area in the southern part of the state. So these are 62 areas of our country that are considered nationally important. And the National Heritage Area program is run by the National Park Service. It's funded by the National Park Service, but each heritage area has what they call a coordinating agency, which is some organization, usually a nonprofit, sometimes a government agency, or even a university, but some organization that operates the heritage area. So it's a national program, but it's locally managed by an organization in that area. And the Appalachian Forest National Heritage Area is operated by an organization called Appalachian Forest Heritage Area Incorporated. We've been around for over 20 years, since 2001, but it was only in 2019 that we got the national designation. Our organization, our mission is to conserve, interpret, and promote forest heritage to enhance landscapes and communities in the highlands of West Virginia and Maryland. And each national heritage area has a defined area that they encompass. Our national heritage area covers 18 counties, the 2 westernmost counties in Maryland, and 16 in West Virginia. Morgan County in West Virginia is our easternmost, and we go west all the way to Braxton and Nicholas County, Preston County in the north, and then Greenbrier County in the south. And if you look at this on a map, it looks very close to the outline of the Monongahela National Forest. If you're familiar with that, kind of surrounds that, plus all the counties on the edge of that. And what our unifying theme for all of these different counties is what we call forest heritage. Now, each national heritage area has some unifying theme or statement of significance for why it's nationally important. And this is great for our national heritage areas when it comes to tourism and heritage tourism specifically, which is a huge market in our country. People in the tourism industry will tell you all the time, visitors are looking for authentic, unique experiences. Well, the National Heritage Area Framework can help you tell what makes your area unique and authentic. So in our case, we are saying that our national importance is forest heritage. And what we mean by forest heritage is the ongoing story of how the forest shapes history and culture and how nature and human use shape the forest. So the way that the forest is shaped by humans and the way the forest shapes humans. And I think those of you with us who work with maple syrup or other tree syrups or other forest products, and that's a great example of these kinds of traditions in our area with that interplay between the human world and the natural world and the mix of culture and natural resources. Okay, so how do we, here's again the definition of forest heritage. And so how do we tell this story of forest heritage to the world? Each national heritage area has what they call a management plan, which describes why the area is significant and how the organization is going to manage these nationally significant resources. And we've got 4 themes in our plan, what we call the abundant forest, which is the unique species and ecosystems that we have in this part of the state. What we call the crucible of isolation, which is the unique culture that we have. The logging boom builds the nation, which is the history, which is our industrial history, with logging and the rise of the railroad, or the rise and fall, I should say, of industry in the area. And then our 4th is what we call the resilient forest, which is the way that our communities and our ecosystems have recovered from the logging boom to now have the special places and the recreation economies that we have in our area now. And our management plan also has 5 goals, which talk about what we as an organization are going to do to manage the assets and resources in our area. I'll only talk about a few of these tonight. And I'm going to skip all the way to our 3rd goal in our management plan, which is supporting sustainable tourism and economic development to benefit rural communities. And there's several ways we do this, but I'm going to tell you about 2 of our main programs related to tourism. One of those is what we call Highlands Creative Economy. And this is a program that we run in partnership with Eastern West Virginia Community and Technical College. And we do several things with this. First of all, it's a monthly networking meeting that we have on Zoom. And this is open to anybody interested in the tourism industry, whether you're a tourist attraction, a CVB or visitor center, the kind of secondary tourism related businesses like hotels, other service industry. Anybody who's interested in the tourism industry is welcome to come. Lindsay here is one of our regular attendees. And it's a networking meeting. We have updates on what programs we're doing. We have guest speakers every month, very similar to how this series works on different topics related to tourism. This year, we've had people talking about accessibility, folklore, different grant opportunities, all kinds of stuff. And then we always leave time for an open discussion for attendees to share ideas with each other, ask each other questions, general networking, whatever. We do the fourth Thursday of every month. Everyone here is invited. I'll give you the link later if you want to come. Our next meeting is next Thursday. And as part of this larger program, we host an annual tourism summit, which is kind of a bigger version of these networking meetings where we have even more presentations from people in the tourism industry. This year's summit is coming up in a couple weeks on Thursday, August 3rd. This is going to be at the Evergreen Heritage Center, which is in Allegheny County, Maryland. It's a free event, free registration. I'll give you some info on that as well. We're going to have a keynote from Dr. Susan Williams from Concord University. Our theme for the day is looking at best practices from organizations in Maryland that are in the tourism industry, and then some general tools and examples all about visitor experience, sustainable tourism, all that kind of stuff. So we hope that sounds interesting. We hope you'll come, and you should be able to learn something. And our fourth goal in our management plan is connecting and supporting partner organizations in our area. We broadly define partner as anybody with common interests who's doing similar work. One new program that we're trying out is what we're calling Appalachian Forest Volunteers. This is a volunteer program that we're doing, and one of the components of that is we've got a website which has an event listing. You have volunteer needs that you're looking for volunteers. You can upload your listings there to try to recruit volunteers. Or if you yourself are interested in volunteering, you can go on there to see what's available and maybe sign up. And something else new that we've got this year is a grant program. We're calling this our Appalachian Forest Grant Program. Last year we did a grant program as part of our Highlands Creative Economy program that was specifically focused on tourism projects. But this year we've got, thanks to our funding as a National Heritage Area this year, we're going to be able to award additional money. And so we're expanding the scope of our grant program. And so for this grant, we're taking applications for anything related to historic preservation, cultural preservation, preservation of natural assets, conservation, interpretation or educational outreach, tourism development, or partner development. And this is open to any nonprofit or government agency in any of our 18 counties. And the applications open now, and the applications are due July 31st. So there's still a little bit of time to put together an application if you're interested. And if you haven't done this before, or you have questions, or you need help with the application, we're more than happy to walk you through it. We've set up an email specifically for this project, grants@afnha.org. I'll give you that in the chat as well. So shoot us an email if you have any questions, and we'd be really interested to hear your ideas, any projects that you might be thinking about. And Also, about grants, if you are not a nonprofit or government agency, if you're a private business or whatever, and there's some other grant out there that you're interested in, but you're not eligible for, we as an organization can act as a fiscal sponsor to apply to grants on your behalf if it fits our mission and goals, and we feel like it's a good fit for us. And last, say a little bit about our AmeriCorps program. This is our longest running program, one of our most successful. If you're not familiar with AmeriCorps, it's a national program. It's a national service program. There's other programs all across the country where an individual serves for a year as basically a volunteer, and we pair them with different organizations in our area. They help these organizations, and they also earn a living stipend and some awards that you can use for school or student loans, things like that. And this is a great way for people to get more work experience, and it's great for small organizations that might not be able to hire a brand new employee, but who might still need some help for different projects. And I mentioned this last because Danny Helmick here is one of our AmeriCorps members. He's been with us since January, and we've got about 30 members altogether. We've got about 4 that are serving directly with us at the Heritage area, doing different things. And Danny is managing what we call our pollinator initiative, which is one of our programs to conserve and enhance this forest heritage that I've been talking about. This is our contact information. If you want to have a look at our website to hear about any of these programs that I've been talking about, my email's up there if you have any questions for me. Like I said, I'll put some info in the chat about what I've been talking about. But there's our contact info if you want to get in touch with us. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Danny.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ben. Okay, hello everyone. As Ben mentioned, I'm Danny Helmick, the pollinator coordinator for AFNHA, and serving as the AmeriCorps member as the pollinator coordinator. And as he said, you know, if it's a great program. I love everything about it. And I actually went to school for trees. I went to school to study trees, and I think it's ironic because I didn't know anything about pollinators or wildflowers until I got into this position. So it's definitely something worth checking out and looking into. And so today what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit about agroforestry and pollination, and why it's important to the bees and why it's important to West Virginia. And of course, I kind of already said this, but this is we're going to be talking in our introduction. We're going to be talking about the importance of agroforestry, of course, the pros and cons, and the importance of it to pollinators. And with agroforestry, it's a hard word to say. So it's a term for, oops, let me face it. Oops. There we go. So it's a term for land use systems and technologies where woody perennials are used on the same land management as agriculture, crops, and or animals. So what this kind of means is I have a little sort of an example on the slide there. Think of orchards. Apple orchards can be considered that because it's very basically any sort of farmland that has trees on it. Important trees to whether it be the farmer or the pollinators. And let me pull up my notes real quick. And one of the reasons why I kind of bring it up and why it's important is, for adults who tend to like alcohol, Angry Orchard, that's a very popular hard cider brand. And they care a lot about this sort of thing. And if it wasn't for this sort of thing, we wouldn't have stuff like Angry Orchard. So, and not only does it produce stuff like that, but it's also good for our water quality, air quality, soil health, wildlife habitat. And that is one of these steps as to why it is super important and becoming more important. And we've known about it for a long time. It's been used for as far back as we can remember. But as I kind of mentioned just a few seconds ago, one of the reasons why it's become more popular now is its ability to sequester carbon. And it's helping the world reach its climate goals. And it also diversifies the income for farmers. And it also contributes to our food security, our soil protection, also helps out local wildlife habitats. And it's starting with all as environmentally friendly as everyone's becoming now. And it's a good thing. It's a really good thing, but also has a lot of issues and a lot of cons, not necessarily issues. But first I'll talk about how this is affecting our forests in some ways. So it's helping mitigate some of the climate change. It stores excuse me, getting tongue tied. So agroforestry contributes again to the mitigation of climate change. And it does this in 3 different ways, is what I was trying to say earlier. It does this by the first way is by capturing and storing carbon in biomass and soils, helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and avoids emissions through reduced fossil fuel and energy uses on farms. And of course, I have some of the benefits of what agroforestry can, and it doesn't really show any of the details, but as I mentioned earlier, it protects soil, animals, crops, and homes certain wildlife animals from extreme weather. Just think of like what shagbark hickory, what that tree can do, and its bark is real shaggy, but it also helps. It helps homes certain bats from the extreme weather. And actually, shagbark hickory trees are very. That's kind of like what they prefer. And I don't mention this anywhere in my slide, but I've been hearing a lot of, and it's also a kind of a concern, but white nose syndrome in bats, because of a certain fungal infection that they have been getting from, I can't remember the name of the fungus, but I'm sure the last person I talked to, I'd have to fact check all this, but the last person I talked to said it was caused by foot traffic or whatever, and also can contribute to habitat loss. When we cut down a lot of these trees, we also lose a lot of habitats for certain wildlife animals, such as our local bats, and our local bats are pollinators to certain plants. Of course, another benefit of agroforestry, it improves water quality, and produces many useful wood products. And I apologize if you can't see the picture here. That wasn't the best picture to use, but this is some of the disadvantages of what agroforestry can do. The biggest downside is time, because crops grow way faster than what trees do, and trees kind of take a lot of time. So that is one of the many problems that it can have, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. It just takes a little bit of time for it to get started. And of course, when you're growing trees with crops, the trees are going to fight for water and the crops are going to fight for water. That's, again, one of the problems. I'll get into why is this important to pollinators. And I kind of mentioned it earlier with the bat. But whenever you have a massive area of agroforestry or agroforested farms, it provides a diverse habitat for all these pollinators because it's a good nesting ground. They forage in those areas. And, when we think of pollinators, we like to think of just honeybees or butterflies. But that's not always the case. There's more than just the honeybee and the butterfly that we should be worried about. I don't mention it in my slide, but I would like to talk about it a little bit, is the rusty patch bumblebee. It is the first bee to have ever been put on the endangered bee species list. And its population, I think from 2017 to now, has declined by 83%. And the reason I bring that up is because it's super important to agricultural farms, because this bee actually pollinates a good bit of farmland. And the reason why the population has declined is because as our population increases, the need for building infrastructures and houses and hometowns grows. And so we get rid of a lot of prairie and grasslands, which is what this bee it's home to. And this bee, I forget how much it actually has the ability to pollinate, but just a small colony of rusty patch bumblebees are able to pollinate a pretty decent sized farm. And that's really important. But we tend to don't realize how important they are until it's too late. So that's why this is also important to them as well. And of course, it's helped proven to mitigate the number of pesticides that pollinators are exposed to in their day-to-day lives. I've already mentioned that it increases foraging, nesting, and egg-laying sites. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but when we think of just a honeybee or butterfly, but basically just about any small animal can be. Humans are. Just about anything you could think of other than certain ones. And so I don't have much about beneficial trees that can kind of help. This is kind of what I gather what could be important to our local population. And again, this is something that, if you're interested in doing agroforestry, you might want to look into look how much time you have, look how much land, and what is best for your land, and what is best for what you would want to do, and what is your long-term goals. Because we don't do stuff when you do something like this, it's not for immediate turnout, it's for the long term. And the reason why I picked these trees on the bottom, like the southern crabapple, flowering dogwood, and the big leaf maple, is because they are very good blooming trees. That's very beneficial to pollinators because they like to seek out big flowers, anything bright colored, and anything basically diverse, which is really important. And again, by planting the right trees, it is beneficial to soil and crop health. Your trees will help your crops, and your crops will help your trees, essentially. And this is kind of my call to action that if anyone is interested and it helps, what Ben talked about earlier is we have the pollinator initiative, and that's what I do. My duty is to do public outreach, get many people behind this sort of movement. And we can't really give out trees, but I do have a lot of seeds. They're all native West Virginia wildlife seeds or wildflower seeds. And you can't go wrong with seeds. There's not really anything you can do with them, especially if they're wildlife or wildflower seeds. They're kind of hardy. You can just cast them out and they'll grow. That's what I did with a couple of my gardens, and they've seemed to be doing okay. I'll put my email in the chat. if anyone is interested. And if you have any questions if you want to register your pollinator garden, or if you're looking into starting your pollinator garden, you can reach out to us, especially if you're close to Elkins in Randolph County, West Virginia. And we'd love to help out with that. And the only thing we ask is when we give out the seeds is you just give us a shout out and get more people involved with that. And I think that is it for me. Hope everyone learned something, and thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Lindsay. So my name is Joey Alloy. I am super happy to be presenting tonight and to be the last speaker. These were a couple of great presentations, difficult to follow up, but they actually cut my work in half as well. So I am the Appalachian Program Director here at Future Generations University. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what our program does, especially how it's related to the work that the Appalachian Forest National Heritage Area does, promoting pollinators, thinking about and working through agroforestry, and working to promote and sustain Appalachian forest heritage, because the work we do in the Appalachian program is very similar. And then I'm going to go in to touch on something that we actually don't do, or don't quite do, at Future Generations, and it's community gardens, which for produce, right? And there are a lot of ways that we can do community gardens. I'll talk about a few as we get into it, and I'll explain why and how I think it's actually pretty intimately related to some of the work that we do in the forest. And I think that if I don't do anything else, I will maybe make clear to some of my friends why it is that the produce guy is now stamping around yelling about how wonderful forests are. All right, so what is the Appalachian program at Future Generations University? I imagine a lot of you all know this. Full title is the Appalachian Sustainable Development Learning Community. The purpose of an SDLC is to create regional networks of action learning and experimentation. Action learning and experimentation in what sense, right? First, we're a university, so we want to promote learning sort of broadly, but as a university, we really focus on community development. And we want to create, in the Appalachian program, a network of people who are practicing community development and integrating these different types of work with each other to the extent that we can, in order to experiment and learn from it in, in ways that are both rigorous and academic, but also in ways that are very focused on aiding practitioners more than theoreticians, right? Our fundamental belief is that growth occurs through nurturing partnerships, like bringing AFNHA to present alongside the Appalachian program at Future Generations, and all the work we do in the webinar is certainly partnership based. And broadly, we work in agroforestry. I don't need to explain to you all what it is, because Danny did an excellent job at that. That really makes it a cakewalk for me tonight. This is a great picture of Sarah working with both a partner farmer, he's in the center, Jonathan, at Silver Run Forest Farm in outside Harrisonburg, Virginia, and Thomas, our videographer, showing that what we're doing here is working with producers to promote and educate other producers through the creation of educational materials, including this webinar, videos, and such on. So what do we do at the Appalachian program? I give you our mission and whatever else, right? We do research on maple sap flow. We do research on sycamore and black walnut syrup, best practices, those sorts of things. I mean, for the most part, scientific research, although there are, we do lean into the social sciences and the humanities as well, and sometimes the fine arts. We do learning, we do teach courses at the university. In the Appalachian program, we do in-person workshops on tree syrups and other sorts of workshops. We have, as you saw Sarah making in the last video, a video in the last slide, a video series on riparian crops that is educational. That'll also come with white papers, handouts. Reading the Woods is an incredibly important learning method that we have, that we send out to the public through field practice, through wood walks, through presentations like this one, that really focuses on getting folks to think holistically about forest farming broadly, or farming and the forest, and how they are related to not just the natural constraints or natural possibilities, but also the economic and the social constraints and possibilities. Then we do online learning like this, webinars. But we also do action as well as research and learning. Like I said in the last slide, action learning and experimentation, right? And so for action, for us, an awful lot of it looks like agritourism, very, very similar, as Ben was saying, to the type of heritage tourism that AFNHA really sponsors. We want people to tour maple sugar bushes, right? Because we think it's a good way to learn about the relation between the forest and the people who live here. And it's also fun. We're celebrating, right? This is just a real quick introduction to what Reading the Woods looks like, right? So this is, we ask ourselves the 3 questions: what's socially feasible? What can you and your family do? What's a product that's going to be valuable in your community, whether that's at the farmer's market or on a farm stand, or if you have a truck and you're willing to drive, your community can be pretty big, right? So what's socially feasible? What's environmentally possible? Do you have walnut trees? If you don't have walnut trees, you're not going to make black walnut syrup. Do you have riparian areas? If so, there are things that you can do and that you may need to do. And then what's economically viable? How do you not lose your shirt? How do you not lose the family farm? Nobody's going to get rich doing this work, unfortunately. But you can do some beautiful, incredibly meaningful things, and be able to actually pay the bills. So why are we doing work in agroforestry? Well, lots of reasons, but to shoot through it pretty quick, Appalachia is one of the most biodiverse, agro-biodiverse regions in North America. All of the great descriptions that Ben did about forest heritage in Central Appalachia, Western Maryland, West Virginia, the western part of Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee. I mean, these are even Southwest Pennsylvania, Southeast Ohio. These are areas where forest heritage is thick. It's part of the lifeways. And part of the reason it's part of the way people live lives here is because the forests are incredibly abundant, fecund, and diverse, right? 78% of West Virginia is forested, right? So if you're going to be working in agriculture, in farming, in economic development especially, you need to be not turning a blind eye, but looking at the forests, right? Most of the land is forested. We need to be thinking about that if we're going to be developing the community that lives on the land, right? That's why we do agroforestry. That's a little bit about what we do. I don't want to go too much more into it because I know y'all have heard this before, and we've got questions and answers. So that's, that's what the land itself looks like. But what about the people who live on the land? Actually, it turns out most of them don't live in the forest. They live in urban areas, right? Less so in West Virginia for sure than in other parts of the Appalachian region. Certainly Western Pennsylvania, there's more people in Pittsburgh, right, than there are in Charleston proportionally, right? Same with Knoxville and those sorts of other urban areas. But those are just the top 10 cities there, and they're around 20% of the population of the whole state. So 1 in 5 West Virginians lives not just in a city, but in one of those top 10 cities, right? And whether they are cities or small towns is something we can debate about, but they are places that are not as forested as beautiful Pendleton County or Pocahontas, right? So if you're trying to do work engaging the communities of Appalachia in those places where you don't have as much access to forest, how are you going to do it? And I think one of the things that has really worked in a lot of different towns, not just those top 10 big cities, but much smaller towns and throughout West Virginia, are community gardens. So why are community gardens good? Maybe I should take a second just say what a community garden is, right? It can be many, many things, right? Maybe it is a plot of land or a series of raised beds that any member of the community can go and garden in. Maybe somebody else actually established the garden and community members are taking care of it. Maybe instead there's an organization, a nonprofit, or some other philanthropic organization that not only built and planted the garden, but actually maintains it. And they just give the produce to the community. Could be any of those things, right? So why do people do it? For the same reasons that we do agroforestry in future generations, and the same reasons that AFNHA does promotes forest heritage, right? To build community. You can build community on a neighborhood level in urban areas, right? And you can build community in ways that people are familiar with. Growing and sharing food is an Appalachian tradition. This is why Mountain State Maple Days has been a remarkable and successful event, because it's a food product. We're growing it and sharing it, right? There are other reasons why people engage in community gardens: urban beautification, community food access, making sure that members of the community have access to food. That can be part of a food sovereignty movement, where the people who need to eat are able to control the food that they eat. And it can solve the problem of urban land access. I mean, I lived in an apartment on the second floor. You don't have a yard on the second floor, right? So working in a community garden is very helpful to make sure that fresh vegetables get to kids like Molly Rose. But I want to point out that not all of those goals are always necessarily mutually reinforcing, right? There are tensions. If you're really trying to have neighbors access land that they didn't have otherwise, they may be paying a $20 fee or something. You can butt heads against people who are really just looking to find food in a neighborhood that doesn't maybe have a grocery store, right? Some folks want the food to be there just so they can take it for free. Anyone can take it for free. Other folks want to be able to work hard and practice those agrarian values and harvest their own tomatoes, and they don't want somebody else coming in. So there's tricks. If you ever go to Manhattan, the old community gardens in the southern part of the island, they all have like 12-foot high, strong fences around them that are locked with a key. So I don't want to talk too awful much about this, because I want to make sure we have time at the end of this webinar for questions. But this was where I was doing my community gardening, and when I say this was work I was doing, this was volunteer. This was labor of love. This was how I got my vegetables and how I hung out with my neighbors, right? The community garden has shifted in terms of management, ownership, and participation since these pictures were taken. I haven't lived on the East End in about 5 years. But the thing is that the garden itself had a legacy long before I got there. And I want to show you, this is the first, on the right is the first bed that we had. And if you look on the back, you can see those red stalked red ochre plants. And in the middle is a small, the little mouse melon cucumbers. But the front of the picture is, they're gnawed on. We had harlequin beetles, but those are horseradish leaves. Horseradish is a perennial. The root's there for years and years until you harvest it. And that was there before I got there, right? And that sort of community sense of our neighborhood has this legacy in the garden that is there in the life of plants. It's very similar to the same way that, like a sugar bush, these maple trees have been there for a long time. And, my dad, my granddad tapped these same trees. It's very different, right? Even a perennial like horseradish is much more short-lived. It's that fast urban pace of life, but it's not, you're not losing everything about that traditional Appalachian lifeway. How did we do it, right? A lot of ways to do this. If you're really, there are, you know, like apartment communities that set land aside so everyone is really in physical contact with each other, right? The East End's kind of a dispersed neighborhood. There's a lot of apartment buildings, but they're not all in one spot. They're all sort of peppered throughout single family housing. So we did it through social media. Something as easy as a Facebook group. You can just, you know, put up a little flyer, as I did in the garden, saying, hey, join this Facebook group if you want to communicate with anyone. It builds community in a very different way if you don't actually get to see each other in the garden. So please do that. Don't just try and engage online. But in terms of, you know, record keeping, communication, it's really nice to be able to have pictures like that are labeled, right? Where you can just spend time in the garden talking to each other, weeding together. You don't have to get into the whole details of production planning. You can just put that somewhere else. So that worked for us. These are the types of pictures I saw in there. I said, these are the things I've planted in there. I've seeded these things in there. Took the pictures sometimes before I, you know, really finished with everything. But it's you can see the fences that the cars here right there in the neighborhood. And there's no better neighbor to have than a garden. You can let your kids run free through there, right? And you can learn how some things go. I didn't get as much into some of the sources of conflict that I think are really interesting that can be resolved in ways that I think are very traditionally Appalachian, but presented enough. And I would love to get some questions from you all about the relations that you see between the backyard garden, which has always been part of the Appalachian farm, and the community garden.
Yeah, so we're going to open this up for questions now. This is for all of our presenters. So questions for Joey, Ben, and Danny. You can go ahead and put those in the chat or the Q&A box, whichever you prefer. I know that we have one already, and I believe that this is for Ben. Do you have any sense of what Congress factors in while determining a heritage area? Does it need to have a historical significance to state or country? And does it need to relate to a natural resource of some kind?
Well, the answer to that probably is going to depend on the individual area, but overall, I'd say it's most often a combination of historical, natural, and cultural significance. I was going through my head trying to think of some examples of which ones might be more historical or more natural than others, but all the ones that I can think of, what they're promoting is a combination of national, cultural, and historic significance. Now, some of them promote one of those over the other. We try to promote them equally, but some of them are a little more historic than others. So, for example, there's one called Journey Through Hollowed Grounds, which covers several states, or well, parts of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia, I think. But their big theme is Civil War history. So that's one that's mostly focused on historical importance. I couldn't think of any that were entirely naturally focused, but like I said, most of these areas promote the natural and the cultural. And when you look at what these communities promote as important to them, it's even the culture is often tied to the landscape, and the landscape's often been impacted by culture in some way. So it's hard to separate. So it really comes down to what that particular community thinks is important and what they want to promote. And it's that community effort and community pride that gets the national recognition, because it takes support from all of the politicians in your community. We had to get all of our state representatives and state senators. We had to get all of our representatives in the U.S. House and all of our senators to sign on this. I hope that answers your question.
That was a big question, so it took a big answer. Thank you very much, Ben. Danny, I have a question for you. What are some plants that homeowners can have in their yards that can help with pollination? You talked about some of the trees, but what are some plants that we could have in some of our gardens?
Okay, so if you're just wanting to attract pollinators in general, it's always a good idea to plant native, wild, be abundant, be diverse with it, just native. I can't name any off the top of my head. I don't have my flower list with me, but as you know, as I mentioned with my talk, we give out those seed packets. But if you want to really just increase any sort of pollinator traffic in your area, you really need to get as many diverse wildlife or wildflower plants, because pollinators are kind of like us in a way. If we keep seeing the same thing over and over, we're not going to really want to do much with it. So, and they're the same way. So if you have diverse plants, you have diverse options, and that is kind of can be a way to help increase that sort of thing. And I said this to someone the other day, because they were telling me, they just planted nothing but milkweed, which, milkweed is a really good native plant to this region, but you're just going to be attracting probably mostly butterflies, which is good, but you're just going to be attracting mostly them, and you want as many as you can. So, and I don't have any specific flowers offhand. Hopefully one of these days I can just name stuff off out of the back of my mind, and I hope that answers the question. So that's a little bit long and drawn out. I'm sorry.
Perfect. No, thank you very much. All right, we've got another question here, and I think this is going to be it's for Joey. So
that was my guess. Yeah. You want me to just get going?
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and read it out loud though, so others
Absolutely.
know what that question is? Okay.
So the question is, for those of us who live in more rural / small town communities, what kinds of ways can home gardens become more community oriented? Shared space is less common and often not convenient, but lots of people have gardens at home, and many people grow more than they eat and don't always have a direct way of sharing those vegetables with people who want or need them. So there's a very wide, that's a very good question. And there's a very wide spectrum of rural places in West Virginia. I absolutely can think of plenty of coal camps where nobody has backyard gardens, but there's a couple houses that got burned out and now they're demolished, and you could set raised beds up there. There's plenty of other places though where there's nothing but yards, or where there's not even maybe a downtown area, right? There's just dispersed rural houses. One of the oldest things that is absolutely a part of Appalachian cultural legacy and heritage that's still going on is church-based food pantries and food soup kitchens and those sorts of things. There's almost always some charitable organization distributing food in your neck of the woods. And if all you've got is an extra, couple tomatoes, probably that's a good spot to go at. For places where you have a lot of, like, Upshur County's like this, Pendleton County's like this, you got a lot of rural areas, but folks have to go, Elkins is like this, Randolph, right? Where you got to go into the county seat sometimes, right? There can be good spots for aggregation and drop off, and where people pick things up. So we have in Southwest Virginia, here in Pulaski County and Floyd County, the public libraries have a little spot where they have either a community fridge or a shelf full of sometimes non-perishable goods, canned items, pasta, but often it's full of fresh produce in season, right? And so think about what our other, churches are, like I said, very often already doing this work, but sometimes libraries could be doing this work with just a little push, right? And there are other places where communities congregate. One of the trickier things, of course, is a lot of times when people are leaving rural areas and heading to the county seat, it's because they're going to the grocery store, and grocery stores often don't want a bunch of free food out front. I get it. But libraries are great. Churches can often be great. And sometimes churches will set out on the model of the little free libraries that I think we are mostly probably familiar with because they're popping up everywhere. Churches will set up things like blessing boxes, right? So it looks like a doghouse on a pole, and it's got an opening door. And when you open it, it could either be filled with books if it's a little free library, or it could be filled with food products, right? Some places have practices like community fridges where a church building or nonprofit will set a fridge out front. Some folks are afraid of liability if they do that, right? There's a farmer somewhere in Marion County who just, he's got so many chickens that he just gives the eggs away, and he says, come on, now's the time to come get the eggs. And he's got an egg fridge that he gives away. So there's lots and lots and lots of ways to share the food. But just two other quick things I want to also say is that, especially in rural areas, tool lending libraries are huge, right? Tool sharing is a way old Appalachian tradition, right? I mean, people like the one guy in the holler who's got the tractor has to till up everybody's garden in the spring, right? Because he's, we share, we're neighbors. So tool lending libraries, Charleston just has a new tool lending library as part of their public library. They're very helpful for sharing tools, and the public library, same public library here in Pulaski that gives away free tomatoes at certain times of year, also has a seed library, right? So your inputs can be shared as well. You can share seeds, and if you're a seed saver, you're probably like me, and you probably save way more than you need, just in case, and you can give those away later. And there's a lot more to be said about that, but I don't want to hog everyone's time.
Okay, well, I'll give everyone a chance to put any last minute questions they may have in the chat or the Q&A. And while we're doing that, I just want to remind everyone, while we launch our exit poll, if Heather, you can go ahead and do that. We are not having our webinar next month in August because we are going to be at the West Virginia State Fair. And so I will encourage everyone to come and visit us at the State Fair. Please just don't come and see us. Go see lots of exhibits at the State Fair and enjoy it. But we will be there with the Mobile Sugar Shack, and there's lots of fun activities going on. So please don't plan on being at the webinar. Come out to the State Fair. And before that, as a reminder, AFNHA is having their tourism summit. So that is also an awesome opportunity to get out and network as well. And you can learn more about their tourism summit on their website. And as always, we enjoyed our time with everyone this evening. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Out of the Woods webinar in September. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you guys so much for a wonderful presentation. Ben, Danny, Joey, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Yep, thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for presenting with me, guys.
Yeah.